Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Sunday, which means it's stream time. Um, if you're new here, welcome to Elfbait. I am Eli, also known as Elfbait on other streams, and this is my place to talk about gaming, hobbying in general, mostly RPGs, but also miniatures and just general hobby discussions. Um, I will be joined by at least one guest later. Once he's able to clear up some RL stuff. But yeah. So welcome back. Today, I figured I would talk about something that came up last week. Earlier, well, I guess last week, seeing as we're at the top of the week. But really, I was thinking about sort of the perception that a lot of gamers have and have had for a long time over in regard to new rules, optional rules, new material that's released for games, whether that's third party or homebrewed, and even official content, and just kind of how over time, really since the dawn of time, for the 50 plus years of tabletop RPGs, um, how there's been kind of a mixed bag of reception for that. And uh, kind of some thoughts I had on the topic and how I tend to approach this content. And I guess once we get into it, it'll sort of evolve into whatever it does. And like most of these streams, it'll go into the weeds somewhere. But that's fine, because then we get some interesting talking about other stuff too. Good morning, Squirrel Hermit. I see you're here. Brian James, welcome. I guess I should start with kind of what I've been up to hobby wise. So it's been a big, long gap of no gaming. There was Easter, and then there were other things that got into the way. Um, but I have still, I am always hobbying. One of the best quotes I've seen about why be a GM as opposed to like a player, and I think this fits my take on it really well, is as a game master, it's the only part of tabletop RPGs that allows you to play constantly. As a DM or GM, I'm always making stuff, whether that's thinking about adventures, writing adventures, creating new monsters, new magic items, uh, thinking about how my next session is going to go, thinking about the session that just went around. As a GM, you're always thinking. And so, yes, I have been thinking. But also, I mean, I do miniatures and stuff too, so that allows me to kind of keep it handy. What I have been doing recently is doing a facelift on some of my old forest terrain. And so here is a piece of the old forest terrain, the original terrain from over 10 years ago. This has had a lot of stuff pulled off of it, but you can get the general just some CDs with some rock, with some cork board and some actual natural sticks for the tree trunks. I a long time ago envisioned this idea of like not including the treetops on my forest terrain because they really just get in the way, and so I just do the forest floor and then the trees. But anyways, after the facelifts, this is what I end up with: a much more lush environment. And even though like the original cork ones had a bunch of the green tufting on them and some of these little like fern type plants, I've added extra foliage and also a ground cover, which is actually a terrain paste of my own making, some sponge flock, and actually teabag content, so loose leaf tea. But it ends up being a much more presentable bit of forest while still being functional, because we still have places upon which a hero can stand and they can get in and about, the forest floor. And it also is a fair amount of elevation, so it does block terrain, or block line of sight, I should say. So this is what I've been doing in some of my free time, just kind of giving the decades old and quite honestly speedily made terrain. I was going to be running Pulp Alley when I first got it for some friends, and I wanted to have some passable terrain, so I made that stuff up real quick. And then this is also before internet. I mean, the internet was there, but before we had the YouTube craziness where we can just like, I want to learn how to make X, blah. There's 10 videos. Didn't have that, so I'm putting all of that to use as well. A lot of experience that I've gathered over the years. So yeah, there's that. Also, I started writing a new old school D&D campaign. Whether or not I ever get to play it, who cares? It'll be there. That is set in sort of a Highlands type setting. It's not Scotland. It's not supposed to be Scotland, but the general topography and environment is sort of I'm calling it the uplands, because if I say Highlands, everybody's immediately going to think kilts and bagpipes, and that's not what we're going for. It's a fantasy setting, but it is a campaign with a particular theme, not necessarily a story, but a theme. I mean, there is a plot, but the general gist of it is that it's a 0 to heroes. Players start at 0 level, and then work their way up through it. And it's started with the premise in my brain of how can I get characters involved in domain play before they actually have a domain. And so in this particular campaign, they have an opportunity to get themselves involved in a war between barons in this kind of remote section of a kingdom, and comic hilarity ensues. I'm going to do a hex map for that. I've been basically just brainstorming locations right now. I'm going about this kind of differently than I normally would. I have some general ideas of how I want the lay of the land to be, but instead of doing the map and then plugging everything in, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of brainstorm a bunch of key locations, and also thematic elements, so sort of doing an outline style and then detailing it up as much as I can. And then I will do the map based on what I end up with. We're going to have a mix of baronies in there that kind of fall to one side or the other of the conflict, or even neutral in the middle. There is a distant dukedom who's kind of in charge of these baronies on the edge of the map. And so that will be a thing as well. But yeah, that's something I've been working on too. I have been writing a new miniatures game that capitalizes on a retro sci-fi setting I've had in my brain for decades, and never really knew how I was going to go about it. But yeah, so that is what I have been up to, and my guest has arrived. Here is GM Cody.
Hey, what's happening?
Hey, man. How's it going? Thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
And thank you to Raven for letting you have to play. Feel like I should be knocking on your front door. Can Cody come out?
So how's it going?
It's going all right. How about yourself, man?
It's going all right. Still trying to wake up.
Caught you on Crown of Command late. Wasn't able to watch it live, but you're the don't be a dick.
Mm-hmm.
Stream was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
That's a whole other episode. I mean, those guys are doing good work. They can get a little gatekeepy at times, but I think it's all in good fun, and they have their zone, and that's what they're
about. They're very specific about what they like and what they do, but they don't. The one thing I like about them is they don't judge. They don't judge too harshly what other people do. It's just their thing. That's how they like to play. But
exactly, and that's why I still watch. I mean, honestly, if they were like being dicks about it, well, first of all, they'd be hypocrites presenting a don't be a dick thing, and then being dicks. Looks like we got an RPG grandma here too. All right, so what have you been up to game wise? I know you've been in Bears games and.
Right. So game wise, I've got a lot going on. I've been playing a lot of getting back into wargaming again. So I've been playing about every other week. I've been going over to my buddy Jack's house, and we've been playing some old school 40K, whether that's second edition or Rogue Trader. And we're getting back into the swing of doing that. Also, just hooked up with my friend Lynch, who Lynch watches the channel, and we're going to get back into playing some historical games. He just painted up. He just painted up the new Black Powder Epic set for the American Civil War.
Oh, nice.
And so, even though I have American Civil War in four
Is that
different
the smaller
scales,
scale one, or is that the 28 millimeter one?
no, they're the smaller scale. They're like
Yeah,
12.5 millimeters or whatever, you know, like in between.
proprietary scale that nobody else makes, and so.
But it's cool. He wanted to do it. He's been wanting to do it for a long time. So we're going to play some. I think we're going to play actually some Fire and Fury with those miniatures. In a couple of weeks, we got a bunch of guys that I don't know coming over to his place, and we're going to, you know, have a good game of that.
12 millimeter seems to be coming up because there's I think it is there's another company, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, who is doing 12 millimeter World War II.
Oh, really? No.
And I'm like, why 12 millimeter? We got 15, we've got 10.
Yeah, I get it. I get it in Warlords case because, like you said, they've created their own scale. They want you to buy their miniatures.
That's honestly the only reason I can really think of to do that, is to create a proprietary scale that people can't just go out and buy cheaper, more available third-party stuff. I really felt like when GW did War Master originally, when they plopped 10 millimeter, I had never heard of 10 millimeter, but I mean, I guess it was pretty prevalent. But I don't think a lot of people outside of historicals had heard about it. So when they dropped 10 millimeter, me and my friends are like, why didn't they just do it in 15?
Yeah.
But,
well, at the time though, like 10 millimeter wasn't a popular scale. Like you couldn't really get. Again, I think they did that on purpose because you couldn't get. There weren't many companies making fantasy 10 millimeter stuff.
Yeah, you know? And I think 10 millimeter has. I mean, for some things, it has the advantage of lining up with a modeling scale because isn't it like 1/144th or something like that?
Yeah, I couldn't. I always get confused with the different modeling scales, but
miniature scale and modeling scale are not exact anyway, so it's just sort of an approximation. We're gaming tonight, I think, too, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
the 2E game.
Yep, we're playing AD&D Second Edition tonight. Of course, I've been playing in Bear's Palladium Fantasy game, but that got canceled because I think everybody knows Hungar is not doing well. He's in the hospital still, as far as I know. And then, of course, yeah,
take care of Hungar.
And he was playing in my game too, so we had to cancel my game this week, and we'll see what happens with that. But and then of course I just started this week because I had the whole week off from work, and that was unusual for me. An unexpected vacation. So I was, of course, I never sit idle. I'm always doing something. So when I at the beginning of the week, I started planning out an imaginations campaign,
which I'm there for. I mean, I even if I just get to follow along, I love imaginations.
Yeah. It's always fascinated me, but I've never like sat down and been like, okay, I'm going to do it. And so I was going to do it solo, and my buddy Andrew decided he would like to play with me. So I set up this fictional 18th century classic imaginations campaign and drew out a map and everything. And me and him just started playing this campaign, and we have like 3 battles we got to fight out, which I will be doing videos about on my YouTube channel. So everybody will get updated on that, whether they're interested or not.
Yeah, the imaginations are really cool. In fact, I'm posting in the comments the link to my modern imagination, Alcovia, which I guess calling it a modern imagination is kind of a misnomer because I've worked on it in several different time frames.
Yeah.
So I've got the modern Alcovian Civil War, which is supposed to be a 20th century, right when it's, when I first started the project. It's kind of a dead project now, but the blog that I blogged on it for it went on for years. Kind of petered out when 2014, when Russia invaded the Crimea, and it became a little real.
Yeah,
I didn't feel quite so comfortable doing doing a blog about a Balkan war using photography from from past conflicts for news and stuff. So, but then I've also done Alcovia back in like the 18th century,
Yeah.
and then I've done interwar Alcovia as well,
Right.
And a 19th century Alcovia.
Yeah, I'm actually I've gotten really into this. Like, it's just completely taken up all my mental space, like coming up with this stuff. It's become really fun. But I found these Mark Copplestone did these new sculpts, which I showed you. They're called Little Soldiers, and they're like neo retro toy soldier looking miniatures, and they're really nice looking.
Yeah, they're styled in that kind of old school toy soldier style. If I needed, like I ever need, another miniatures project, I would pick some up just because they look like they'd be a breeze to paint.
Right. Yeah.
They've got that enough detail to be detailed, but not so much. Well, Copplestone, actually, to be honest, to give Copplestone credit, because I've always loved his stuff. I got a lot of his stuff for pulp. Super easy to paint up. His stuff paints like a dream. He's got there's no fat on his sculpts.
No, not at all.
But they're not lean either. They're like the Wagyu of sculpts.
Yeah. No, he always, I've always really appreciated his sculpting style, and he did something really special, I think, with these sculpts. I really love the look of them because they don't look like old toy soldiers, and they don't look like Airfix models from the 70s, but you can tell that they're inspired by that. They were definitely designed for modern wargaming and painting. And I actually just watched a video on War Games Illustrated. Some guy took a bunch of them and painted them in a bunch of different styles, just to give you an idea what you can do with them. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going to be collecting some of those. And I'm probably going to take this Imaginations that I've been doing and update it to like the, like interwar kind of period, and get some like tanks and convert them and stuff like that.
Some of his miniatures in that line bear a striking resemblance to some of the Xeon miniatures from Xeon troops from Gundam.
Oh yeah.
I have a bunch of Xeon transfers around. I'm like,
yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's you could do all kinds of things. He actually has a little bit of like a story behind the miniatures and stuff, but what's cool about it is it's just all inspiration to do what you want with them. You could definitely do. I could very easily see those models being used for some kind of science fiction game or something like that.
What scale are they again? Are they 15 or 20 or whatever?
They're 32 millimeter.
Oh, so they're big. So they're actually like the older kind of toy soldier.
Yeah. He made them just a little bit bigger than they're basically heroic.
He's right in line with the modern GW, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
But Cal's comment, and welcome, Cal, and we also have Dirty History and Hobbies. If folks don't recognize the name Copplestone, if you ever picked up any of the old Grenadier Fantasy Warriors figures, that was Copplestone.
Yeah.
And you can see the DNA of that continues into his independently produced fantasy range. They fit right into that old Grenadier line. His barbarians. Actually, it's funny that some of them are pretty versatile. Like I have his barbarian shaman just for a pulp figure, because who doesn't need some crazy dancing character with a snake wrapped around him for the jungles of whatever, a Stan or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's perfect for that. Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the Imaginations project that you're working on. If people want to really dip a toe into the spirit of Imaginations, you have to look for it on the Wayback Machine, and I'll pull it up here. But Major General Tremorden Rettering's group. It used to be a website, not a blog, a website. Back in the day, that was just a group of old historical players. The reason I think it's gone is, honestly, I would be surprised if any of them are still alive.
Right.
Because they were old when I started reading it.
Yeah.
A decade plus ago. But they chronicled their venture into this. Back then it was sort of a Victorian science fiction type of thing, less than an Imaginations thing, but they kind of dip a toe in there because they were playing in a fictitious part of Africa / the Middle East. and they were all tongue in cheek, like a lot of people are. Like, there was the Wazoolus, and the river was the Wazoo River, so you had to go up the Wazoo to get to whatever. And
Yeah.
but yeah, they started out as a bunch of historical guys, and then and we should all have a gaming group like this, because basically one day a guy brought something crazy, and everybody just played with it. And then the next down the road, somebody else brought more crazy, and eventually they started playing, in addition to their historical games, this crazy fun. There was one instance on the page where a guy showed up with a bunch of boxes of bits and said, "Okay, everybody, here's your box. A month from now, show up with a land ship made out of these bits,
Yeah.
and we're gonna have a fight."
Oh yeah, yeah.
And and they just roll with it. We should all have that gaming group where we just, you can come in and have fun and nobody complains. And that's the perfect segue into today's topic. Because the topic of today is something that kind of came up for me, just through, actually, it was sparked by watching Grumpy Old Slant's channel and him talking about, he's doing this regular series where he covers the new spells for clerics in the Unearthed Arcana. And then also I've been watching through the coverage on AC Mountaineer's channel about his Fanzine Friday. I've just been going back to the backlog where man has a collection of all the fanzines from the 70s and early 80s. And he's just got the old, I didn't know, like, there were APA kind of like style ones where everybody would just like send in a page of work, and then it would get collated, and then that was the fanzine. But where I'm going with this, there's this constant conversation about, do we use it? How do we use it? Is it good? Oh, and then ranging all the way to, oh, that's crap. Why are they doing this to me? Kind of thing. And I got to thinking about, like, really, for me, for example, I've always welcomed new material, whatever form it comes in. Whether or not I use it is beside the point. It's nice to have it, and I think that's the important thing. Because sure, some stuff comes out. The Unearthed Arcana gets panned by a lot of people because a lot of it was unbalanced or broken, and this is the one thing you always hear: it wrecked the game. We never felt that it did, but at the same time, you don't have to use it either. I mean, I think there's parts to unpack in the dialogue about that. I feel like we especially see it nowadays in the 5th edition community, where if it's in print in an official book, then it absolutely has to be used, or is 100%. Trying to argue against using it for the sake of a particular campaign becomes a real big quagmire. But that's not new either. That's been there. It's really prevalent. It probably seems more prevalent because we have the internet to yell at us about it all the time, and 8,000 YouTube videos about why this class sucks or the best way to make this. So I guess I'll start, like, in your RPGs, or even in your wargaming experience. What's kind of been your take on new material that comes out, either officially produced or semi-officially through third party, or even integrating homebrew and kind of fan material?
Yeah, I've never been opposed to using, other rules, other attachments to a game at all. It just depends on what I'm playing, really, and how I feel at the time. Maybe for example, maybe I want to run a BX game, but I just want to use core BX. Like that's the vision of what I want to run as the game. I'm not opposed to using other stuff, but like that's the vision I have. That's what I want to run, and I just lay it down. I lay down the law at the beginning. I'm like, we're only using what's in the basic and expert set, and that's it. We're not using any of the expanded stuff. We're not using anything from fanzines. We're just using this, and that's it. Like that's going to be the spirit of this game, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I do that, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to run a BX game. and I'm just using BX as an example because it has so much third-party material now. I'm going to run a BX game or OSC or whatever, and I'd rather stick to the core. But if you guys want to go outside of that, that's cool. Let me see it first, and we'll use it. I've never been opposed to using other third-party stuff, and to be honest, I've never been a real stickler to the rules either. I've never been beholden to the rules, right? Like I have no problem making up rules or changing the rules or altering rules, whether that's role-playing games or war games or whatever. Just because I've learned through years and years of playing all these games that balance is not really a thing anyways. You know?
Especially in games where you have a GM with a lot of control. In D&D, for example, the DM for the longest time was given a lot of control in that, he was, there was a whole DM's rule kind of philosophy back in the day. When you have a DM or a GM, whatever game you're playing, that trumps any kind of balance.
Right.
Because you can pull anything out of your butt as a GM if you really want to. I mean, there's an argument for, should you, but, and balance is so ephemeral when it comes to games with lots of different axes as far as mechanics go, because it all comes down to circumstance. So, I mean, absolutely, balance is kind of bullshit.
Yeah. When you're talking about games with so many, like you just said, so many different factors in them, it's going to be almost impossible to balance that game. The more stuff you have, more elements you have in a game, the harder it becomes to balance a game, right? So, if you're just playing BXD&D, that's going to be fairly balanced, right? Because there's not a whole lot of elements there, and that could be argued, of course. But they tried to balance the game, and it works as it is. But once you start adding in other things, it's gonna, I just don't worry about it too much. It's a role playing game where I just don't worry about it too much. Same thing applies to war games. If we're playing, Warhammer 40,000 is the ultimate, or Warhammer in general is the ultimate, thing about this. It was never balanced ever. Right from the beginning.
There was a comment that was made a lot on the DBAD stream. I think the comment was really made too, is that, I think you said it, like second edition, all the fun and flavor of that game, of that edition, comes from just how it's messed up and wildly, unbalanced so much of the stuff is. That the fun comes from the imbalance.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, Rogue Trader was the same way. That's what made the game fun, is it had a lot of flavor and narrative stuff. And once you start stripping that out, well, you get modern 40K, right? Where it's just bland and boring and everything has this very straight stat line and there's no crazy, wacky narrative and special rules and stuff. It comes very sterile.
Fun has been kind of cut off the edge. My current philosophy is that when it comes to modern Warhammer 40K, Necromunda is the only place where any semblance of the old Warhammer still exists. Because if you look at modern Necromunda, they got all these crazy things. They're even pulling out material that was hinted at first in Rogue Trader. I think I made this comment on your last Rogue Trader video, that the Water Guild or whatever? Right. They have a sketch of them in Rogue Trader, now they're an actual thing in Necromunda now. They got miniatures for them. It's cool, and that's brilliant. I mean, I think balance is the best thing you can say about balance. Balance is not about getting an actual balance, but making sure that what you're creating is not so wildly imbalanced as to absolutely just flip the boat, of the game. You want to kind of aim for some semblance of balance, but it's only a reasonable approximation thereof.
Right. And I mean, like, Mar Hockman's getting into it, and I think we kind of touched on this, is, sometimes it's not necessarily game balance we're talking about, it's setting balance, right? And this is something I feel very strongly about, and I think you do too. And we haven't really touched on it yet, is that, sometimes as a GM, you you don't want all this crazy shit in your world because it doesn't make sense with the setting you
Oh, yeah.
designed for that game, you know. And we kind of talked about this, but like in your game right now, you're running a OSC game that's a very savage sort of Conan kind of feel to it.
Yep.
And of course, you've limited the magic, you've limited the classes, you picked out certain classes from third parties to fit the world. I don't know. I don't think you changed any of them per se, and you added in some rules to make it feel more like the setting you had envisioned, and that is perfectly fair. You know, like if the GM says this is the setting, this is the way it lays out, and this is what's available, well, that's what's available, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that just further adds to the immersion of the game, right? Like if you had somebody brought up a tiefling, if you had a tiefling running around in your Savage Sword of Conan game, well, actually that might make sense, but like for the most part, as a player character, that's going to go completely against the grain and the spirit of the kind of game you're trying to run.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, if the GM says no, fine. You know, the GM's word is law as far as I'm concerned. You know.
Yeah. I mean, and there's even room to flex some in those cases. You know, I've always been of the opinion that if I've set parameters down and a player comes to me with a really good character concept, that is outside those parameters, but it works, or we can even find a way for it to work, I would much rather have the player playing something that they're really into if I can make it work, right? You know, it's you can't do it always. A lot of times it's a matter of kind of playing some, you know, doing some GM Aikido, where you kind of like take their desire and kind of flip it into something that actually works. Like, I want to play a halfling, and there are no halflings in this world. All right. So why do you want to play a halfling? What is it about a halfling that you really like? You want a quaint, rustic person who lives, you know, kind of a folksy lifestyle and is sort of isolationist? You can do that as a human. Yeah. You know, we have humans in this game. You can be rustic, folksy human guy. Part of it, I think, a lot of times with people's perception, and you mentioned, like, you know, setting parameters, and I think that's the biggest problem that a lot of modern gamers may have a problem, or at least I got to really check myself, because so many times these problems aren't actually problems. They're just exaggerated as problems because the internet. But if the modern conversation is to be believed, there is this concept that if it's in a book, especially an official book, it should be in the game. And that's a really hard argument to make against some players who are like, well, it's here, why can't I play it? Yeah. And as a GM, I think it's really important to avoid because I said so arguments, because that's really, in my opinion, it's a childish take. And
it can be.
Yeah, you know, it's, and you're more likely to get somebody to be happy changing their mind if you can give them a good reason to. And so, like, I tend to talk about like style and theme and, you know, what it's going to do for the story. You know, if I talk about like, hey, we're not going to have any healing magic in this game, and somebody's like, well, that sucks, we're all going to die. I'm like, hear me out. Yeah. Like, you may not die because we're going to do this, this, and this. And also the theme of the game is X and Y. And I try to talk to people about that. But I think the other thing too is that a lot of people are just comfortable in their game that they're playing, and that's okay as well. Sure. I think there's a lot to do with respect there when it comes to integrating new rules into games. Certainly as a player from outside of an existing group, you should not come in too heavy-handedly with trying to, you know, exert your wishes and desires on that group. Yeah. You're coming into somebody else's house. You kind of play by the house rules, right? And at the same time, you might want to actually play with the group a while and then maybe come up with your ideas, because we're always a bit more willing to listen to our fellow players in a particular group, or even our GMs who want to challenge us with an interesting campaign idea if we've played with them for a while.
Yeah.
And that's because there's that trust in that idea. Like if I know that my GM is a good GM, all right, cool, I'm there. If I don't know him from Adam, then yeah, maybe his crazy idea is a little kind of cringe to me and I just don't want to play it.
Yeah.
Same thing as a player. If you're just coming in at the table and you're like, I want to play my tiefling, half were-rat, vampire ASMR. I'm like, and you are who?
Yeah. Right.
But yeah.
I mean, that's something I think we respect a lot more as veteran players. And new players don't quite understand right off the bat, because especially a lot of this would apply, I think, to any generation of new player, but especially people that are coming into games now, because I can't really speak overall for what the new mentality is, but from what I see, it's kind of like they don't have the same kind of ideas that we do, like we always made specific settings and put limitations on those settings or expanded those settings, had different ideas, as opposed to now, like for example, if you're playing D&D, everybody just has this broad example of what the D&D universe is, quote unquote. You know what I mean? And
we came up in a time of campaign settings,
right?
That had, when TSR created a new setting, there was a new box set with a new background. And even if they were part of the same world, like Al-Qadim is technically in Forgotten Realms.
Right.
And so is Karatur, but they were always presented sort of in their own little vein. It's kind of like the World of Darkness games. If you ever think about World of Darkness was one big universe that coexisted, but every single game was written from the point of view of the creature that it was representing.
Yes.
And so you had the sense of style and place, and you had a very solid concept of the game that you were playing. And nowadays, you're right. Everything is just sort of generic fantasy theme park land.
Yeah.
And that's, part of WotC's genius, I guess, or probably more Hasbro's genius, but Hasbro, sending directives from on high and then being executed by WotC. We want the most widely appealing game we can.
Yeah.
Because we want to make money, which if you're going to make money in an RPG set, or in the RPG verse, that's about the only way to do it. Because quite frankly, RPGs are not really a good money. Gaming in general, honestly, doesn't seem to be a very good moneymaker unless you have a company, say like Avalon Hill, or a game that makes a diverse bunch of games all the time.
Yeah.
If you're trying to take one game system though and make a company off of that, you're going to be hard pressed. You have to keep churning material. You have to keep coming out with new stuff. And because face it, we can buy the 3 core books and play forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't need to buy anything else.
I've always been guilty of this because I'd never bought, and still really don't. I never bought supplements and adventures and all that stuff because when I was a kid, I started doing this when I was a kid. I didn't have a lot of money. So I would buy the bare necessities for what I needed and just make shit up.
Me and my buddy had a pretty good collection because we would buy stuff.
Yeah. Well, and when I got older, we started doing that, right? Like everybody in the group would be like, if we were playing a specific system, we would all pitch in, and we had like a community like collection of rule books, and it was and we would have everything for that game system, but we collectively pitch in and just add it to the community pool of rule books.
That sucks when you move out of your roommate house.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, great. I've got 5 supplements for rifts, but none of the core stuff. But yeah, and a lot of it comes down, when we were coming up.
Yeah.
And maybe even more so myself than you, because there's a pretty substantial age gap between you and
For sure. Yeah.
I think about 20 years.
Yeah.
and not dissing you at all, but that just frames me in a different place. There wasn't so much stuff. Everything was experimental and new, and it was the first time we were seeing a lot of this stuff. It's to this point nowadays where like a lot of the YouTube videos I watch, and the guy's like, "I didn't come up with the system." I'm like, "That was in Dragon number 2 such and such." They're like, "I came up with blah 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 blah." That was in OD&D. What if we did something such and such? Palladium did that in 1983. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And that was the other thing. Back in the day, because everything wasn't already written up for us, we were much more amenable to pulling from multiple sources into our game. If somebody else had done it for you, you didn't have to come up with it yourself. So even though the systems may not be the same, you would sit there and say, well, I really like that magic system from that game over there. I'm going to just throw it into my D&D game. And nobody cared.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
at least within your group.
Yeah.
It might have made you seem like a weirdo compared to your other group, to the group down the street. But yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we used to do this all the time, right? Cannibalize different systems and incorporate them in a different game. I mean, at one point we had, you know, Jedi running around in the D&D world, you know, so just because we could, you know.
Scion assist character class, I'm just saying.
Yeah, you know, so yeah, I mean, if you're talking about role-playing games, again, I think it just comes up to I think the game master is, you know, the ultimate arbitrator. And whatever he says goes. But at the same time, like you said, I think he needs to give reasoning, but it makes it better if he gives reasoning behind why he's imposing these limitations and make the players understand the limitations. And also, you know, the same can be applied to war games too. I always, even if we don't have a GM when we're wargaming, I end up becoming kind of the GM anyways, because I'm usually the guy organizing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, we're going to play this system. We're not going to, we're going to use these rules, and here's the house rules. And everybody's like, okay, sounds good. You know, like, so the same thing applies to wargaming too. There's nothing wrong with having boundaries and limitations. And I think there's nothing wrong with having no boundaries and limitations.
And the wild
Hey, what's up there? Hey. You know, I played,
sure.
I think the biggest example of that is when I played in high school in D&D. Our GM there, just everything goes in his D&D world. You know, like he did not, you could play anything, do anything, but he made it work. Actually, he was actually the only person I've seen that made that work. And hats off to that guy, because he was a really good GM. And whatever you wanted to do, I mean, the first question he had is like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And he would either make it up or find a book for you. And it was wild and crazy and ludicrous and over the top. But guess what? We had a blast.
Yeah,
We had a lot of fun.
I feel like a lot of older tables were very much like that, because the older gaming sphere was kind of a wild west of new ideas hitting every day, and isolation played a huge part of that. You felt a little bit more free to do your own thing back then.
Sure.
At least there was less pressure to not do your own thing, because you didn't talk to other gamers very regularly unless you were at university or you happened to be at a high school that had a whole bunch of players, or you went to conventions a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we had across the neighborhoods in kind of when I first came up playing D&D, we ended up with like 4 different gaming groups, but they very rarely intermixed game time wise. We would, we knew who each other was at school, and we were going to interact. We ended up at the same junior high and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
but still they were isolated tables. And then you'd hear about like, yeah, my older brother, he plays with this group of guys, and you're like, they do what?
Yeah.
That sounds cool. I want to do that. And then you actually get to play with those guys, and you're like, this sucks. But, or this is amazing. I never want to go back. But the weekend is over, and I have to go back to mom's. But
yeah, well, I mean, that's part of it too. Is I've always been of the philosophy, not every group's for you. We've talked about this a lot in the past. Not every group's for you. Not every DM's for you. And you just have to find that.
It doesn't have to be. That's the thing. I mean, you have to really accept. You have to accept as a player and as a DM that you are not required to play with anybody. For good reason. I mean, there are certain reasons that are not okay to exclude people, to be honest. But then if they're not wanting to play right for your game or your table, and this is the other thing too, games change at the same table.
Yeah.
When I run D&D games, when I run campaigns differ. Like sometimes we're playing my Vagabond Seas campaign. I very much went into it with like, this is going to be a over the top, crazy nautical campaign where, yes, there is like some kind of octopus dude behind the bar, you know, and there is one of the races are literal deck monkeys. There's these monkey goblins that don't know where they come from, and they just hire on with every ship. And I mean, it was a crazy, like a little bit of Pirates of Darkwater, a little Pirates of the Caribbean, you know. But you get into my current campaign, and it's very much a kind of a grounded, not my old, not my by the sword, but the one I'm running 5th edition.
Right.
It's also a 5th edition campaign, and it's kind of grounded, medieval fantasy, but with a very specific setting. It's not wildly fantastic, but it does have fantastic elements. I mean, there are dragons, but yeah. So it's but I'm still the same GM.
Yeah. I mean, like I completely agree with you, and this is, I do the same thing, right? Like whatever game I'm running, and it could change even with the same game system. I always have a different idea or a theme for that campaign, and that's what I'm. I lay it out to everybody. This is what this campaign's going to be. This is the setting. These are the basic parameters. This is what we're playing this time around, right?
Yeah, I mean,
within that framework.
When it comes to like the Star Wars RPG, I'm notoriously harsh on people wanting to play Jedis, even though it's part of the setting. It's like everybody always wants to play a Jedi, right, or a Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Yet I did run an all Jedi campaign, so that because that was a good story, and it was a good setting, and that's the thing. If you're a player. And we're kind of off topic about how to integrate and bring in new rules, but whatever. If you're a player coming to a group and you like the group, maybe they're friends and you know about it. You've been sitting around the office or whatever, and you heard about this game and you really want to play with them because it sounds cool. And you come in with a character idea that doesn't fit. You're doing yourself no service by getting grumpy and then or bitchy about it and then wanting to play a character that fits. Wait around, talk to people, because chances are that GM has as much ADHD as every other GM, and he's got 1,000 different campaigns, and your character you want to play might just fit one of those. Wait it out, or gonna say it, be a GM. Make not everybody can do it, but like offer to run a game if you have a style of game you want to run. You never know. You might convert somebody. They're like, you know what? I never thought D&D could play this way, but there it is, and we had a great time.
Well, yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. The other thing is, I think it comes down to a lot of player responsibility too, because a lot of players, old, new, whatever, I see it all the time. There's always at least one guy, usually more, that want to go completely against the grain of what the setting or the universe is.
Yeah, and somebody's got to be Bilbo.
Right. Whatever it is. I think, like Bears games are the prime example of this, because he does a very good job of setting the parameters of what his game is, whether that's his heroic games or his fantasy games or whatever. He lays down these parameters, and then inevitably there's always one or two people that want to go completely against the grain of that parameter. But I think as a player, I think it's partially your job you're going to have more fun if you just kind of go with the grain a little bit. You can go against the grain a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. And you can incorporate new ideas, and maybe, whoever the GM is like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's a cool idea. But you still have to go within that. You still have to work within that framework, and it's going to be better for everybody.
Yeah.
If you do, like, you're just kind of ruining the whole spirit of the game. If you're just like, we're playing. Well, I'm not going to give that example, but
I know which one you're going to give too.
Yeah.
It's a form of narcissism, right? That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a form of narcissism. I always make this joke. There's a guy we used to play with in Vancouver, he's a British guy, and he was the guy that if you were to make the campaign and say, in this campaign there are no elves, there are elves in the world, but there are no elves in the players. You all have to play humans. He would show with this great idea for an elf character.
Yeah,
He would always try and go against exactly what you said no on, because that's the nature he was. And it's a narcissistic trait. It's the my idea is better than your campaign, therefore my idea must have front stage. Players like that annoy the living shit out of me, and eventually just don't get invited back to my games because they're just disruptive. They don't want to play the game you're offering. They want to play the game in their head where they get to do whatever they want.
Which is saying a lot, though, Bear, because I saw in your heroic stream the other day when you're doing the character generation, you're a pretty flexible GM. I mean, you're sitting there having a dialogue with the players on, okay, this is kind of kooky, but this can work if we do this.
No, I'm all about dialogue. That's the thing. I'll work with you, but if your attitude is I want to play X and X is not acceptable for the campaign world, well, sorry, buddy, you can't play X. So I got asked a question in the heroic chat on my Discord. This was really fascinating to me. The GM has created a game where he's using the heroic way, which means he's created a campaign rank. This is the rank limit of the campaign. Everything's under it. Make your characters. And his buddy wants a power that would, to be effective the way he wants it, be 10 ranks above, well, not 10, but 5 ranks above the campaign limit. He's like, how do I do that? And I'm like, tell him he's not playing in the spirit of the campaign that you're offering him. That's how you do it. Because at the end of the day, players, for me, a vast majority of players, not all, clearly not all, but a vast majority are just kids in a candy shop. They just want everything. You know what I mean? And they sometimes need a little bit more of a parental or guiding hand to go, no. Maybe we'll get there eventually, but right now you got to start back here, you know? Drives me nuts. Drives me insane.
Yeah, I mean, and even in those cases, I mean, there are ways that you can mitigate that. It's like, all right, he wants to have this incredibly powerful character. Okay, well, that's his potential. Right now, he has to be here. Maybe he's Franklin Richards, right? And he's, he can destroy the universe, but right now we're going to put an inhibitor on him, or he hasn't unlocked his true power or whatever. Let's have fun with it. That still allows you to have the concept and play at the level. I used to run into this a lot playing Marvel. I had a buddy of mine, I mentioned him before. If everybody else was playing like Spider-Man, low-level Avenger, X-Men type characters, he's out there, I am the mighty Thor, Hulk, or whatever, And yes, that can work if you have a large enough group. Like the Avengers, the reason the Avengers work with their wide range of power level is because there's so many of them, right? But it balances. But when your average gaming group is 3 to 4 players, and one of them is the fucking Hulk or Thor, and I'm Peter Parker in his year 1 phase, it's a little untenable.
Well, it's not just that it's a little untenable. It's a lot of the games, and this isn't meant to be me touting how great heroic is. Let's get that straight. But a lot of superhero games fail to be able to address that thing. Thank you. To address the power disparity. But Marvel always was, and it was built into it. And that's what I've sort of tried to unlock with heroic, is this thing where you can have Hawkeye and Thor going against the same type of villain that can challenge both of them, one more than the other. But Hawkeye's just not going to get steamrolled if he uses the rules properly, and he's, he can be competitive. He can be a part of it. This is why 90% of superhero games, I think, are trash, and I don't like them. There's great ideas in them, but I don't use them because they lock you into a power level. Even the vaunted Mutants and Masterminds solution to differing power levels was just give you more bennies at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It's like, no, that doesn't fix the problem. That means that person's handicapped in the game terms. That character is handicapped and therefore needs something. So when players come in and they want to play that level, fucking cats. They want to play that level.
I've got a dog going crazy.
I can hear it, Dan. If you have a system that addresses it, perfect. If you don't, then you have to address the player's expectations, right? And that's where it gets ugly, because players don't want their expectations addressed. They want their power fantasies fulfilled.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Now, as a GM, when you're trying to look at all this material that's out there and bringing new stuff in, I think, honestly, my blanket statement is, I think you should use whatever you want to use and whatever sounds fun and inspires you.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like as a GM, though, when you are bringing in material, you do need to listen to your players or be mindful of your players. because sometimes the stuff you bring in breaks your game and it's your fault as the GM.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to have those conversations with the players about how to fix that. Or sometimes you are also the douche GM who gave the player this really cool magic item, but then like it's too good and you have to pull back and you have to have that hard conversation. Like, yeah, the hammer I gave you, we're gonna have to dial it down a bit.
Yeah.
I made this spell for my campaign for my 5e games and I made it just to play around with it, but I decided to put it on available as far as my players go, right? Because we use D&D Beyond, and one of my players actually took it. I'm like, hey, he took my spell, and now I have to deal with him having taken my spell. So it's a cool spell. I'm not going to get into it, but it's just one of those ones where like, all right, thank you for playtesting this. The next iteration will be slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, fortunately, I mean, we've all made this mistake. I've made it many times. Fortunately, my players are pretty experienced and understand that, hey, usually they'll call me out on it. They're like, dude, I think you fucked up. I think we should dial this back a little bit. Yeah. And, I think, again, that, as a player, you should be willing to accept that dialogue as well. It's not, don't throw a fit about it. Just be like, okay, yeah, you're right. This is a little busted. Let's dial this back a little bit and make it more tenable for the game. Right.
And for the love of God, if you're having problems with your campaign and your GM or other players, don't bottle it up for 3 fucking campaigns and unload on your GM. Not speaking from personal experience at all.
No, yeah. I mean, I always encourage, I strongly always encourage dialogue and discourse at the table, right? Like, if you have a problem, please let me know. Or if there's something you don't like about the game, let's talk about it.
Well, in my particular instance, I mean, it cost me a friendship.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I lost a friend who is also a coworker. So thank God we work from home now, because that would be really awkward. Having to go to work every day and see the pissed off player in your campaign who used to be your friend. And yeah, that was a case of, I mean, there was other stuff going on, but at the same time, it's like, if this was an issue for this long, he should have been talking to me about it. But yeah, I mean, you definitely have to keep that dialogue going on.
That's the thing, right? And dialogue is hard. Some people don't want to have dialogues. They just want to have grudges. Yeah. And you're going to deal with that. And I don't get people who play with people they don't like. If I don't like you, I don't want to play with you. Simple as that.
Yeah,
I don't want to do my fun time.
That only exists in like convention games or playing in shops or something. I think like I feel like I can't imagine any person's private game willingly playing with people that they don't like.
I've seen it.
I've done it.
I guess I'm just lucky. I mean, I feel like a good part of the dialogue, honestly, on what rules to use and what to bring in, also comes from the fact that so much of the play has shifted these days to playing with strangers, either in organized play at shops where there are specific rules, which then breeds that kind of tournament mentality, even though it's not a tournament. And Cody, you know this, like in Warhammer, even though you go to a store and somebody's wanting to play Warhammer, for some reason they still play like they're at a tournament so often nowadays. And it spoils the fun. Nobody wants to have the fun game, even though it's not a tournament. But also the convention play, and then people seeking players online has created this environment of playing with people who aren't your friends, or at least associates, or regular. I mean, I'd like to hear about your guys' instance of playing with people that weren't necessarily your friends. If you
I could have a whole stream talking about my bad experiences playing with people, but I'm not going to go off the deep end talking about this. But I will say that, like in the past, when I first started gaming, there weren't that many people to game with. So if you found somebody that was interested in what you're interested in, it was like, dude, right on, come play with us. It didn't matter like I had a different mentality growing up gaming than I do now. Now I'm spoiled for choice. I can find specific people that I like and stick with that. And that's what I do nowadays. Like, I don't want to play with people that I don't like or don't get along with. But when I was younger, there were plenty of times I played with people that I really loathed, actually did not like them at all. Did not consider them a friend outside of gaming, but we were kind of stuck. We felt like obligated that we were stuck with this person. Or sometimes it would be something like, maybe we were friends with the older brother and he brought his younger brother along and we hated the younger brother. But in order to get the older brother, we had to bring the younger brother along, right? Stuff like that. And we were just like, oh, geez, he's going to bring, his little brother. But whatever, we at least get the older brother.
I guess in that instance, I have done it too. I mean, if we're talking about like that, because, especially back in the day where your options were limited, such and such's older brother is playing now. Great. Yeah. I'm going to get punched in the shoulder and farted on every 5 minutes because.
Yeah. For me, it was our GM that we had as our GM for most of our adult life, or our high school and college life, was obsessed with building a cult or something, as near as we could tell. So he would bring these
mentality, man.
So he would pick up these weirdos and then bring them to the games. Sometimes they were chicks he was trying to fuck, and sometimes they were, just fucking broken people. And some of them were cool. Some of them are still friends to this day. And there's a bunch of us that we got together and we're like, can we believe that this asshole that none of us talk to anymore is the reason we're all friends? Like, that's so weird. And some of them, I wouldn't cross the street to piss on them if they were on fire. It's just that simple. So, sometimes you play with people you don't like because of how the game goes. Hey, Logan, I saw that bear. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, the classic example of this, of course, is the player whose girlfriend also comes to the table. I mean, that's a stereotype. I mean, almost a stereotype. It's not so much nowadays because, I mean, not as often than not, the girlfriend is the one wanting to play and the boyfriend is just there. But I've also met guys I have met in my past, got dudes who were there at the gaming table because their girlfriend was a gamer and they're like, this will get me in, kind of a thing. But siblings are definitely one of those ones. I have been forced to include siblings to, like, your sister wants to play, let her play. Like,
Mom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was always a problem with my younger brother, right? Because he's 8 years younger than me, so quite a bit younger.
I thought me and my brother were far apart at 6.
But me and my friends would be in my room playing, and he would inevitably come in my room because we shared a room when we were kids. But I still considered it my room. So, like, during the day, it's like, dude, you're done sleeping. Get out of my room. He would come in, and I would be like, okay, my mom would be like, let him play, and so I'd be like, okay, and then I'd have one of the players, he was like a little kid, and have one of the players show him how to write out his character and he'd roll the dice and stuff. But actually, in the long run, that turned out pretty well because now he's a regular player in my games. He's a lifelong gamer now because he.
Same with my brother. My brother and I never had our own room. The closest we ever had was 2 sides of an attic.
Yeah.
Like where there were the stairs and then the narrow part, and then it widened up into 2 different. There was no door. So I've always had him in my space. But him and I, the age difference didn't create too much conflict between us. And he's a gamer. He actually, I told him I wouldn't play with him until he was 10, and he didn't run around me. And from like age 8 was running his own games.
Yeah.
And he's as big a gamer, if not probably a bigger gamer than I am. Like, he's one of those, he's very much a game theory kind of guy. So yeah, I mean,
yeah. But, I also will say that growing up with that culture really helped me learn to get along better with people. I generally can get along with, or I might not want to be friends with you, but I can generally get along with just about anyone nowadays, because I've become used to adapting to different people in different situations, so I think that's might have been a healthy thing in some respects. And also I'll say that some of those people I loathed and hated initially, well, now we're like best friends for life, right? So, sometimes so like I'll give an example. One of my best friends, which I'll name him here, is Chase. When we first met, And Chase still games with me today. He's in our AD&D game. When we first met, we didn't like each other at all. We're very different people. In fact, I still don't understand why we're friends today in a lot of ways.
In fact, I still don't like him.
But we are very, very different people. So when we first met, we really clashed and butted heads, but it took about a year of us because we were in the same gaming group, and now we're best friends for life, right?
Sometimes you just got to get to know somebody. Like in my case, it was when I first got into D&D, the kid down the street, Kevin, was a couple years older than me, and him and his friends in 6th grade, so old, were always walking around with the AD&D books. And so I started playing with him. Well, then his older brother came back from living with their dad to living with his mom, and his older brother was, of course, older than he was, and he was older than I. And at first, nobody liked him. At least we had problems with him. But once you got to know him, he was a great guy. I mean, I don't know too many 80s high schoolers who would hang out with a grade schooler and like play Matchbox cars and slot cars and do Legos and stuff.
Yeah, these days that would be a warning sign, right? Like these days you'd be like, well, maybe we should keep him away from the children.
Well, it's funny because I mean, back in the day, like I remember him and I both ended up with the flu at the same time one time, and so our parents just decided, you know what, they're bored off their asses, and so like I went over to his house, and I was there all the time anyways, and just stayed for like 3 days while we had the flu, and so him and I sat there and gamed and built slot car tracks and stuff together. But he ended up being a really cool guy. He's kind of a ridiculous gamer, but he's a cool guy. But yeah, I mean, sort of off topic, I guess. But yeah, there's in bringing new players in is kind of like bringing new material in, anyways, right? in a tangential way.
I think the greatest triumph you can have as a GM with people is when you inherit a player from someone else, or the girlfriend or the boyfriend or whoever who shows up to the game, and they're not into it, or they're just there to make noise and cause trouble and eat chips, and you turn them into a gamer.
Yeah.
You bring them around that corner to where they start taking the game more seriously than the person that brought them to the game. And then that person that brought them to the game eventually leaves the game and like, let's go. And they're like, no, I'm playing. Goodbye. See ya. Yeah. I literally had to tell one player at a table, no, you got to go. And he's like, but I want to play. Like, yeah, but your girlfriend just left in a huff. You got to go if you want to have a relationship when you get home, man. Yeah, okay. He was really sad that he had to leave the game at that moment. But it's just, it's the way it is. But it's fun.
Yeah, it's always tricky when you're bringing in strangers because you don't know what you're getting. I mean, you literally are taking a giant crapshoot unless you encountered them before. Like I started a game with my team. I started a game with my team at work, and so my only experience, it was actually, I think, my first 5e game that I ran was mainly my teammates from work, including my supervisor. And fortunately, we were all giant nerds.
Yeah.
And so at work, we were always talking about nerdy stuff. So when I'm like, I'm going to run a D&D campaign, and then one of them's like, hey, that sounds cool. And then that turned into, I've always wanted to play D&D. You mind if I show up? And then another guy's like, I haven't played D&D in years. I would love to play. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I got a group.
Did I ever tell you about the Latina that I wound up playing with for a while?
No.
I was at work and we were doing this thing. I think I told this story before. It's a call center, so you have to do this, like, interview each other during the first day of training, and then they present you. And I'm very open about what my hobbies are, right? I'm like, I play D&D. I love D&D. It's a great game. So the girl's presenting me. She's like, this other girl's like, so this is Bear, he plays Dungeons and Dragons. And from across the room, this fucking Venezuelan girl's like, I want to play. Let me know when I can play. Like, she was like,
call centers are nerd havens because they also tend to attract a ton of introverts, which is also where the nerds are.
She was a narcissist in the end, sadly.
Yeah, I know we had, when we were still in the office, there were at least 2, maybe 3 groups that streamed their games and had like actual YouTube channels. And then there were prop makers. Like this one girl was always coming in, hey, look at this whole fish scale Aquaman's wife costume I made.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you have time?
How do you do these things?
And then, of course, on my team, it's always like, hey, we played this video game, da 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 da. And then when they found out I did D&D, they're like, I want to play. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
But
Why do
yeah,
you want to
so
play?
many nerds. You could walk around the call center and just like, all right, I need to get to know that guy because he got that on his desk.
Well, yeah, that was the thing.
Avoid that person.
The last place I worked, we had every 3 months we'd change our cubicles based on what team we got assigned to. But you were highly encouraged while you were there for 3 months at that one spot on the floor to customize your area. So you just walk through and be like, "Hey, that's a dragon on that guy's computer. Let's go talk to him." Like that type of thing.
It was interesting with my supervisor too, because I'm like, all right, dude, I know you're brand new to gaming. You've never played an RPG, but you've played computer RPGs and you play computer games. You're a giant nerd. What are your expectations for this campaign? And in his Birmingham English accent, he's like, and I'm not going to try and replicate it because I don't do the accents that well. He's like, I have only 2 expectations: that there's a dungeon and a dragon. I'm like, and I kind of was like, immediately, I'm like, oh damn, because that was the campaign where I'd written all the dragons out of the campaign world. I'm like, the ancient kings had hunted them all to extinction. He's like, oh man, really? So later on in the campaign, he found the last one, and I'm like, and he was like, yay! And then the game died. So,
well, I've always, even though I was just talking about that, my preference nowadays is to play with people I know and get to know. At the same time, I've always been one to get new people into the game. Like I've had many, many instances of people that are not gamers that I bring in and make a group out of them. Right. I've had that happen over and over again at work. Like when I was just graduated high school, I started working at a video store. And one of the guys, I brought some D&D books one day, and the manager of the video store was like, oh, D&D. I used to play D&D back in the 80s or whatever. I was like, cool. He's like, we should play some D&D. He's like, anybody else around here into that? And then like everybody in the store was like, yeah. So our gaming group is literally all the employees in the video store. And we had 2 older women that worked there, and they would work Tuesday nights while we all went off and played D&D. And so, my group for a couple years there was all the guys that worked at the video store, and they were mainly complete strangers, and we became great friends.
I'm a firm believer that a lot of people are really ready to be gamers. It's just a matter of finding the right game.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school, everybody knew that I played D&D, but when Star Wars D6 came out, when the West End Star Wars came out, suddenly I had new gamers that were interested. They're like, there's a Star Wars game? You can play Star Wars? I'm like, yeah, you can play Star Wars. You want to play? I'm going to run a game up in the library. So, but they weren't interested in D&D, or back then, some of them wouldn't play D&D because it was satanic.
Sure.
I had one friend, and he, if I'm calling him out, I'm sorry, but he's been on the stream a bit, and he's actually in my By the Sword game. My buddy Jim, for the longest time when we were kids, he would not play D&D because his parents, he firmly believed that it was evil. He would play any other game, even if it had supernatural elements, but he just, because of the branding, he just wasn't willing to go there. And now he plays D&D, but Star Wars, Rifts, Beyond the Supernatural. I mean, he played all of that other stuff with us, Palladium and all of that. He would play Palladium, but not D&D. But no, so there, a lot of people are just either the right game or are aware that gaming comes in other forms. And I think one of the very first big hits that we ever saw of that was the World of Darkness boom. Because suddenly there's all these people who would have never considered, dungeon crawling or anything. They're like, there's a game where I can be an emo vampire. There's a game where I can play myself. Or whatever.
Well, I mean, everybody everybody shits on World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade nowadays, but it brought in a whole new demographic in gaming.
Yeah, and a lot of them stayed.
Mostly female.
And a lot of them stayed too, and a lot of them then diversified too.
Yep.
It did bring a lot of its own shit talk. I mean, I remember a lot of people you'd mail, "Oh, you played D&D? That's
for sure."
Yeah, they were that meme of all the aristocrats looking down. You know, they were like, "Okay, you play."
Let me roll my dice with my pinky up.
Yeah.
But
LARPing did that too. Vampire LARPing did that. Brought a lot of people who had never gotten into role playing to role.
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember getting laughed at, snarked at, whatever when I was when I was a teenager for doing the SCA. Which isn't really fantasy, but it's also really not historical. I mean, yes, that's why there's the anachronism part in that. And then of course, 10 years later, people are wadding all over the place in LARPs and at college campuses and local cafes, and some of them are getting way too serious about it. That was the one thing that was kind of creepy about World of Darkness LARPing is the people who.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I had a buddy whose girlfriend would come home at all hours of the night with like marks on her after LARP.
Oh yeah, dude.
What are you up to?
So much sex going on in those LARPs. It was insane. But my favorite story ever is the official Camarilla game, or Camarilla, if you want to be a snob about it, in Vancouver. The Prince, she worked at Hooters. And she wasn't a goth chick either. It was like so weird. She was just a large-breasted girl who really liked LARPing, and because she was a large-breasted girl to LARP who had some role-playing chops, she became Prince real fucking fast, And then all these little simp boys would do everything in their power as, clan leaders to try and keep her in power. It was hilarious. But.
Yeah. I know my brother ran in the Boston area for a while. Disco by Night. It was a 1970s themed LARP.
Okay.
That was fun.
Okay.
I didn't get to play, but he would tell me about it. But including like a big New Year's event or something like that they did where they had like a big old get together in 1970s disco style. But yeah.
They had a Sabbat LARP in Montreal where they were doing fire jumping and stuff like that, and then they would do their bloodbath by like, I'm not even kidding when I say this, getting naked and getting in a bathtub and then being bathed in sangria and stuff like that. That was the LARP where one girl, I don't know her name and I will not say it, may have picked up a social infection and then spread it to 8 other guys in the LARP, including 2 twin brothers who didn't know each other had been with her. Like insane. The vampire LARP in the 90s just brought out insane shit in people, man.
Yeah, I think a lot of people used it as just an excuse to engage in social behavior. I mean, it was a social lubricant, much like gaming is, but in other ways.
That's fair.
Anyways, so I guess I get about 30 minutes before, about 25 actually, before I got to take off. Any other remarks in regard to pulling in new material, using new material, how to mitigate that, what to look out for?
I just try and be inspired by new material. I used to, when I was younger, bring it in whole cloth, but now I just try and be inspired by it. So that way I don't feel like I'm stealing someone else's work. I'm just being inspired by their work,
Yeah. I think that's the only, that I think is the big key. If you're going to bring in material, bring it in for a reason.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And this is the thing that I really think is important and kind of what triggered this whole mentality is some of the real just nasty ire in regard to new material getting released. You see a lot of this with a lot of the new 5th edition stuff. Oh, that book is crap. It does so. Yes, but it's there. Like, I would much rather have new material out there that I can pick and choose and cherry pick from than not. I mean, if you don't want to use it, don't use it. But it's nice to have it there. And that's what I think is the important thing. Maybe it's because I had a lot of access to Dragon Magazine growing up. that I just really used to a constant influx of new ideas and new concepts. And I also wasn't a one game person. I could see that other games did things in different ways and did things better necessarily, or had tools that weren't in my game. But yeah, for me, that's really what, like you said, make sure there's a reason for bringing it in, but also just, understand that it's there to use or not to use.
Yeah. No, and that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've said, about all you can say about using other material. I mean, I think Bear put it best. I think it's better as an inspiration than taking it whole cloth. That's how I usually approach it. Like I see something like a new rule or a new class or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea, but I don't really like everything they said about that. And then I start typing up something inspired by that. Or it might be something that is not available to the players. It might be something I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea for an adventure, or that's a cool idea for an NPC, or that might be a cool idea for something that everybody has in the campaign. Like it might become a core concept of the setting or whatever, I generally just take whatever, I'm a thief and like most GMs, and just take whatever I like and cram it into whatever game I want to run. But
behold my original campaign setting.
Sure.
Some bobs from everything I've ever seen in my life.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's also a fair bit to understand when it comes to, especially like for D&D. You see this a lot with D&D. A lot of the published material is not meant to be in the hands of players. You can see this with a lot of AD&D stuff. There are spells, for example, or magic items that make no sense in the hands of players. They're clearly designed for the GM to throw at the player. Like, what is a player going to do with, an amulet that keeps the undead that are under his command from being turned, which is there's a magic item like that in one of the modules. Clearly that's there for the acolytes of the evil god to keep their undead minions from getting turned by the cleric. It's not so much a scenario that's going to come up too often in the hands of the player.
Yeah.
And so you have to really, when you're reading through the materials too, I think it's clear that a lot of the content is just there as new tools to throw at the players, and isn't, even though it's framed as a general rule, it's not really intended for them, or it's useful to have because you never know what your players are going to want to do. For example, the downtime mechanics that were thrown out in Xanathar's Guide for 5e. It's a good subsystem. It's a good way to have, like you said, either for inspiration, and like you said, Cody, where okay, this is a way you could do it, or just to have in case your players if one of your players all right, I really want to go ahead and have my character start a business that he runs in the downtime of the campaign. Well, now I have a tool for it. I don't have to invent it up or just throw a number to the wall, because depending on how your group is, some players don't necessarily respond too well to just ad hoc stuff, and some GMs don't work well with that ad hoc. They need a little bit more mechanics, and having it there is useful. But don't get pissed off at game companies for making stuff, because we see too much of that. It's oh, they made this book and it's got all this crap in it. Well, fucking don't use it. If you don't like it, don't get mad at the company for trying to exist as a corporation and make money, which is, if you have any other belief that most of these, a lot of the companies have a certain level of heart and soul. But ultimately, they went into business to sell product.
What?
Otherwise, they would just be doing homebrew.
They're not magnanimous providers? What?
Right. So I think we've covered the topic there. I want to give Bear the last 10 minutes of the show here to talk about Heroic.
I don't want to talk about Heroic.
Then don't talk about Heroic. Okay, cool. I was
cool.
going to offer it to you.
No, I appreciate the offer. It's just I'm taking a pimp break.
You
but I will,
got your fuzzy hats in for servicing.
yeah, exactly. The dice are being cleaned, the caddy's up, getting herself a nice undercoating, the whole
Cane's getting polished.
but I have been having a lot of fun. So we talk about bringing ideas in to make the game or make your campaigns better. I've been having a lot of fun working on the culture of my superhero setting. And one of the ways I've been doing that is by using suno.com to make 80s songs that are related to superhero culture. And I want to show you guys something just for fun.
That is crazy. I saw you post that, and I tinkered with it myself.
It's so insane.
Yeah.
So currently, one of the bands that's doing really well is a song called Metal Savior by a band called King in Yellow. So I'm making the album covers for all the bands. And this is the album cover I've come up for King in Yellow's album cover. Nice. I don't know. I think it looks pretty badass.
It's a very, very like prog rock kind of a band.
It's meant to be 80s metal, but like the metal that's not all about like, so basically the lore on it is that the King in Yellow band used to have a front man named Tommy Ray. Tommy Ray, with this album, Tommy Ray has split from the band because they want to be serious musicians and he just wants to be an LA glam rocker, right? So their first album without him is called The Stars Are Right. And it's, like a little jab at him, like we got rid of him, the stars are now right. And they're going deeper into their weirdness, where Tommy Ray's first album that he's released is called Toys for Tommy. And the cover, I'll show you the cover of Toys for Tommy, just to give you an idea of the difference. I got two for him. I'm not sure which one I'm going to go with yet. But to give you the idea of the difference in the mentality of the bands, right? So, so it's a slightly different vibe on Tommy's albums, if you get what I'm saying, right? So This was a character that my buddy Pat played, and we basically gave him the. You ever see that? There's I think it was Patton Oswalt was doing his comedy thing, talking about how all 80s beer commercials were just a guy with a guitar, rock news, or just a guy going wow, and it would turn everything into something else, and there'll be hot chicks at a pool or whatever. Well, Pat was like, I want to play this character. I want to play an 80s glam LA rocker who has reality control through his guitar. And I'm like, nice. All right, we can make that work. So it's just kind of fun bringing all that lore and putting it together. And people are like, why are you doing this? Because I can. Like, there's no other needed reason, because it makes me happy. It makes me feel good about what I'm doing. It keeps me inspired. It keeps me moving forward. And I think that's ultimately the goal for most DMs that are doing homebrew. As long as you're being inspired and you're having fun, your players will benefit from that in the long run. Because it just brings the world more up. I know you and I sometimes disagree on players' buy-in. I've been lucky. I get a pretty good buy-in from players. But I think that may also be because I have a pretty good sales pitch while I'm doing the buy-in part. Yeah.
I feel like so I write a lot of stuff for my campaigns too, like in the background. I don't do I'm not very good with the AI art and stuff like that. And I don't have like the subscriptions for it and everything.
Yeah.
But like I'll write ballads in the lyrics to ballads or folk tales and things like that to pepper my settings, because it's always nice to have handy, and it also helps me solidify the world in my brain, which as an improvisational GM who is really good and flexible, having that anchor, and I think this is kind of some of the stuff you do with your projects too, all that little background stuff you do means that it's all up here already. And even if you're not necessarily going to use it all, you've thought it through and given it some time in your brain. So when your player goes, well, what's the primary export of this particular city state? You're like, it's weed.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't have it decided already, you're like, it's in this part of the country. It has this kind of proximity. The weather is like this. It's clearly going to be some sort of grain. Wheat. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. Like, that's just the way it is. But what that does is that provides you a level of verisimilitude to your game for the player experience, where they ask a question and they get an answer. You know what I mean? Like, why is it that in the Pelothean League in my world, most of the major buildings are built with white, like almost stucco, like when you see those like Mediterranean type cities, with orange roof tiles, those ceramic roof tiles? Why are they all orange? Why are they all white? Well, no one's found out yet. But there's a reason. And I'll point it out every time you're in one of those cities that you got this weird pattern happening, and eventually someone will find out why and they'll learn. But the point is having that stuff there makes it something interesting for the players because they realize they're in a living world. They feel like they're, and as a result, hopefully, if everything goes proper, they will connect to their character in a living way.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like I remember running a campaign, and they come into this village, and the crest of every roof has a series of spikes, iron spikes going along it, and all the windows have like beaded curtains or fishnets over them. And when they later on they found that even in the thatch on the roofs there were sharpened sticks and bits of metal and stuff. And they're like, what is going on here? And later on, of course, they found out that this place is plagued by creatures of the night and the fae and stuff. And so, like, nobody would dare have a chimney that didn't have an iron grate fitted into it because something could come down your chimney. And, like, at dusk, you'd see them all putting out, like, plates of, bowls full of millet and, milk. They were in an inn, and the ladies, like, sets down a platter of, honey and milk at the hearth, and like the next morning they get up and the bowl that the milk had been in was now full of like dead mice and sparrows and stuff because the wee folk had cleaned house during the night. And, that builds the world too, and you don't have to like spell it out for the players. You just kind of show it along, like your tiles and your stucco. It's there, and it doesn't have to mean anything more than just description, but it can lead to more. And there can be reasons, and sometimes those reasons the players will find out what those reasons are, and sometimes they won't. When the players in my group started seeing all that stuff, they didn't realize that one of the big themes that was coming up was this whole bit where the land was sort of abandoned because the emperor of the land was off in a tryst with the Queen of Winter, this fairy queen, and he's like kind of ignoring his duties. And in his absence, the church in the kingdom was kind of rising to power and changing it from being a land of folk beliefs and stuff to being something more orthodox. And that theme built up over time, but it started out with, hey, there's a real big strong belief in creatures of the night and wee folk and all of that. So
I'm a big I go into pretty deep details too, but usually I'm a big proponent, especially in a medieval fantasy world, of show don't tell. So like I don't have a huge document telling you everything about the world or whatever, and there's a reason for that, because I want you to discover the world as you're playing it, because you wouldn't know everything about the history of this world, or you might know the history of your land, but even then, you're probably not going to know everything. And there's a lot of history in my world that's forgotten about. So I incorporate a lot of little subtle things, like we were all just talking about, into the game as you're playing. And a lot of times people don't pick up on it. And when they do, and if they want to know more about it, then we can expand on it as sorry, had a thing go off on my computer there. As the game goes on. And so, I definitely am all for like immersion into the game, and I'll be as immersive as the players want to get. Right.
Yeah. That's the thing. I think I guess one of the problems is not a problem, but one of the things that I see come up a lot of times with games is an expectation that everybody plays the same and that everybody comes to a game with the same intention. And that's just not a thing. I mean, it can be if you're lucky and you really cherry pick and, I hate to say it, vet your players, because that's something that a particular dude in the internet likes to like throw out there. You have to vet your players.
I wonder who what dude that is.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, people come to the game for different reasons, and as long as all of those reasons line up and they don't produce a disruptive player, then it's okay to have players who don't care why the walls are white and the tiles are red.
Well, on the player thing, one of the things I've always maintained, and I will always maintain, in my games. I've had players at the same table who are the master thespians and I go to the bartender and ask him if there's any rumors. I try to intimidate him. What do I roll? And I'm happy to have both at the table because both of them engage in a different way, but they both engage.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's
the key, really. As long as you're want to be in the game and you're active in the game and you're engaging, I'm fine. I'm fine with whatever play style you want to play. There's nothing wrong with mixing play styles. At my table, at least, I know it doesn't bother me in the least.
It just weirds me out when people are really uptight about specific play styles. And I'm not even necessarily speaking about the dude who who I commented.
Yeah, you are. It's fine.
No, because there are actually a lot of degrees. There
are a lot of dudes.
There are a lot of dudes in the game who, in the hobby, who are like, I don't like this kind of player at my table, or everybody needs to be this. I'm like, all right, cool, great, good on you for limiting your player base.
Well, you know what? That's fine too. I have
that is true. I mean, they can play play what you want to play.
My problem though goes into when you start shitting on how other people play the game, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't appreciate how a lot of people play games, but I don't go around shitting on it either, or try not to.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally I'm like, something makes me really cringe and I'm like, oh, I don't know about
that.
I
mean, I'm trying to be really careful because I mean, honestly, if that's what you want in your game, definitely play it, but I don't understand it.
I don't get it. I might not get it. I might not want it, but hey, everybody's free to play however the hell they want. I'm not going to tell somebody, I'll give my opinions, but that's just my opinion, right? That's just my 2 cents on how I run a game and what seems to work for me. But whatever works for you, hey, go for it.
Exactly. For all I know, you're a guy who has so limited time, and he really wants it to count for every last little bit. So he wants to get all of his players to be the most bang for the buck that he can. And if that's what you need to run your games, then that's what you need to run your games. That's how you interface with the game, and that's what you need. Cool. Like you said, there are some kind of cringy things. Like if what you need to be able to get into your game is a bunch of devoted lackey players who are like, 2 stages away from, like what Bear was saying, like a cult. Like that's a little weird. And I've seen that group.
I don't mean to cut in on what you're saying, but I also will say that I've become pretty good throughout the years of adapting to different types of play styles and different tables. And that's because I've played with a lot of diversity of different people that play completely differently. And I think that's benefited me overall because, it's great to incorporate new ideas into your philosophy of gaming, even if you don't initially agree with it. So I have no problem with looking outside of my box, and I would encourage people to do so also. Don't get stuck in your fucking bubble. Break out of it occasionally. You might find something you like,
that's why I try to when I'm
try a different style of D&D. Maybe don't play the same goddamn thing over and over all the time.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy from Dark Tower, Fireball's coming online like that. Don't be that guy, know? Yeah. Try some new shit. You might have fun. I think that's something those of us who came up in the 80s and 90s are really open to, because in the 80s and 90s we had such a plethora of games coming out all the time of all different genres and styles. We tended to try a lot of different things. You know what I mean?
And also because we were so isolated, every table was such a different flavor of D&D too. Even if you want to just look at D&D, yes, there was lots of games coming out, but there was so much diversity from one campaign to another. One campaign may be full of lasers and spaceships, even though it's still D&D, and you're like, "There's no lasers and spaceships in my game."
Yeah, I played.
It wasn't so weird.
I played in a group that was literally played it like a board game. They were literally playing it like a board game. We might as well just been playing Hero Quest. That's what we were playing.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck is this? And then I played on the complete opposite. And I was playing in this, they were all college kids and they invited me, and I'm like a teenager. I'm like 15 years old. They're all like, well, they were older than college kids. They're probably in their 20s or 30s. and they invited me to play, and they didn't roll a single dice the whole time they played. It was like pure thespian acting, LARPing, role playing, and like the lady that was running the game literally brought me a notebook for the background of like my culture and what kind of food they ate, and like maps of the lands and my full like family tree. And it was just like the complete opposite, right? Like,
what you need to do is take that notebook and go, I get all of this, but what's my motivation?
right, exactly. So, you know, yeah, I've played on both extremes. I tend to think, of course, that extremes are probably not the best way to go. You know, somewhere in the middle is where I've always fell. But needless to say, I did gain something out of all those different types of games and play styles that I've played. And there's, you know, so I think it benefits everybody to experience different kind of play styles and different ideas and bring them to your game. It might have been something like I would never play the way that those guys were playing D&D and they were just playing it like a board game. Not interested. Now, if you
That's
do,
why Dungeon exists.
exactly. But at the same time, like I saw some benefit to that. I was like, oh, this is kind of fun playing with the miniatures, and they had these really nice like maps they made and all that stuff. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's immersive. That's interesting. I might incorporate some of those ideas.
We did some of that even when I was a kid. I remember we used to build these massive Lego dungeons with like working secret doors and traps, and then we take our Walparth and our Citadel miniatures through them. And it was kind of cool because we'd revolve, we'd kind of rotate. Like, all right, Brian's doing the dungeon this month, and Kevin's doing the dungeon this month, and we'd come into the room, and like all of the living room floor, and they'd be covered with little slips of paper that would like you'd pull the slip of paper off as you went into the room, and it was super fun because it was playing with Legos and then playing D&D, but it was very much that board gamey style because of course
I think if I was going to run a fantasy game, D&D game, and use dungeon crawling, I would go buy a bunch of fantasy Legos and just do, you know.
No, they have official D&D Legos, so you're also.
But there's also the ones they did before that, which was also the nightly stuff.
Medieval ones, like
yeah. Grab all of that.
That's what we just in the space one.
Yeah, and just make a bunch of crazy fucking stuff, you know.
Yeah. So we only have a few minutes left before we're gonna go. You know, I think, really, I mean, last words, I would say, just be open to new material, be open to different play styles. Flexibility, I think, is the best thing you can have in a game. Flexibility within limits. I mean, be flexible, but know your tolerances. Are you
don't have your mind so open your brain falls out, but do have it open.
Exactly. I mean, you're one player away from having that cool idea in your campaign that you never thought about. That's the other thing too. Like I've mentioned before, I wasn't going to have Dragonborn in a campaign, and this new kid wanted to play D&D for the first time and wanted to make a Dragonborn, and we had a conversation, and next thing you know, I had a cool piece of lore and history and a new land for my game, for my campaign world. So you are literally one player away, or one article away, or one supplement away, one YouTube video away, whatever, from having that next cool ass thing that lasts through all your games. For me, one of the things that always stuck was the Dragon article that had bows built for strength. It made so much sense. Bows built for strength, and I've always kept that. I've kind of always been attached to this idea in AD&D of having above level spellcasting. Something I'm still tinkering with because we see it in lore and fantasy. I mean, the young apprentice who gets a hold of his master's book and decides, I'm going to try and cast this spell. Well, what happens? You could be hardline and say, well, the game says you can't cast that spell, or we can say, all right, you can try. There's a big chance that something will go horribly wrong, or you might just fail. Which is more entertaining, right? Yeah. Which is ultimately more fun, and that's the big kicker. Let's see. I know I didn't get to a lot of the starred comments, and I know some folks slipped in without me saying hello, but thank you all for coming. And I hope that, again, this was useful. I think I'm going to have to drag Cody on here sometime so we can talk miniatures specifically, because we had a good conversation.
I'll sit down. Don't worry.
It probably won't be on a Sunday stream. I know that's kind of tricky for Cody to do a lot of cases. That's why he hasn't been on a lot of them. So we'll sneak one in somewhere else. But again, thanks for coming, everybody. As usual, have a good one and get out and game.
See ya.